Hello everybody, welcome to the Museum of American Speed. My name's Tim and I'm the curator here, and I'm so excited to be talking to you today. We have a very special guest and a new friend of mine, Chuck Miller. He's here to see the museum, to visit us, be here for one of our events, Cars and Coffee, and talk to all of our visitors that come to that event, but also talk to you about this wonderful car that we have behind me here, the Red Baron, which is an icon of our museum. It's one of the most recognizable cars that visitors see when they come and they get instantly excited about. But moreover, we're going to talk to Chuck a little bit about his life and how he got involved with cars and all the fun things that he's been involved in. And it's been a wild ride. We've been talking over the last couple of days, and it's been really fun to go back in time to what I call the golden age. You know, you talk about the 60s and the 70s with custom cars, and it's really exciting. So Chuck, thanks so much for coming to join us. This is really cool.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, it's awesome. And you know, I'm going to kind of go back to my own experience. I'll never forget my friend Vinny. He owned a drag car chassis shop, and one day he called me up. I was just a young guy. I was probably only 12 or 13 years old, and he said, hey kid, I've got this big box of models. He said, come get them. He said, I don't need this junk in my shop. And I'll never forget it. It was like Christmas. I showed up, he gave me this big box of built models, and out of it I pulled the Red Baron, the fire truck, you know, all these really wild customs, and you know, the Hurst Olds with the 2 engines, and you know, it took me back to another time period, you know, a time that I didn't live through, but I could tell right away it was a fun time and an exciting time in car culture and what was going on, and now here I am sitting next to the guy that was involved with so much of that, sitting, you know, in front of one of the coolest hot rods that I think has ever been around, the Red Baron. So tell us a little bit about your story. How'd you get fired up about cars as a young person? Because it's been a long life of being involved in this stuff.
Oh, it's been a long time, yes. Well, I guess you could start from the beginning. I always liked cars, drawing them to building model kits. And I was building model kits, geez, probably 11, 12, 13 years old. And one thing would lead to another, and building model cars, and a lot of them I still have today that I built back then, from which, well, anyways.
They're cool cars, too. I've seen them in your book. They're wonderful.
Yeah. So when I was 14, 15, right in there, I built one model car, and I entered it into a local hobby shop. They had a contest. Well, I won first place with that. Oh, wow. 53 Ford convertible. And I got a trophy for that, oh, so big, and in fact, I still have that trophy today.
Oh, that's cool.
So then one thing led to another. Then when I was 16, just like any 16-year-old kid back then, I got to have a car. I got to have a car. But in the meantime, I was working with a friend of mine. He had a body shop, and I was working with him. He'd pick me up, take me to the shop after school and whatever, and I was saving my money. And my first car was excuse me, a 50 Ford Coupe. I paid $35 for it.
Pretty cool car.
It was rough, but it was mine. It was mine.
Yeah, exactly.
And naturally, I wanted to start working on it. So I was 16, got my license, and that's when it started. Now I could drive to work and go drive to school. So after school, I would beat a path over to the shop. Got to go work, you know, work in the shop also, but I'll say he would let me work at night on my car. So I started working on the car, excuse me, and I finally finished it when I was 18, and Mike and Larry Alexander, very well-known customizers in Detroit area, I met with them, and they shot it for one of the magazines, Riding and Restyling.
Oh yeah, I know the one, yeah, that's
so
cool.
It was in that magazine, and I thought, 18, car in a magazine, in high school.
How do you get any better than that?
That's what I'm thinking. Wow, geez, this is great.
Mega ego boost, I'm sure.
It really helped, you know, and I figured that's what I want to do. I want to build cars, hot rods, anything. So I graduated, then stayed working at the shop, you know, for the gentleman that I worked for. And then he decided about 2 years after that, I was 20 at the time, that he wanted to move and go to Florida. He had it, I guess, in Detroit with the snow and whatever, and he just wanted Florida. So he wanted to leave but he didn't know what to do with the shop. Asked me if I wanted to buy the shop. And boy, I didn't have the money. I'm only 20.
20 years old, yeah, no kidding.
So he says, well, here's the deal. A local paint store that everybody bought their paint and materials and sandpapers and stuff like that from, he had a outstanding bill with them. He owed him money. So he said, I'll tell you what, he says, if you take over that bill, we'll just call it even.
Oh, wow.
So I thought, well, that's a good deal. So I talked to the gentleman that owned the paint store. I told him what we wanted to do, and he's, well, yeah, I guess we could do it. You think you can pay it off? Because he didn't want to be left hanging.
Right.
So I said, yeah, I can do it. So, but me being only 20, I had to have a co-signer. So I talked to my dad, and he just, well, yeah, if you think you can do it. And I said, yeah.
You're biting off a chunk, but the reward is, yeah, could you imagine that now?
Oh,
Man,
geez.
alive to have your own
yeah.
body shop.
So he says, okay. So we had papers all drawn up with the paint store and myself and signed them, both of us, and all of that. And every month I'd make a payment, and still buy materials from them.
Wow.
I'd buy
That's
materials on this account, then pay on the other account.
The guys at the paint store, did they think, this Miller guy, he's okay.
He might be all right, yeah. So anyways, I just kept doing that, paying it off, and it got paid off. And I was, I don't know, 21, 22, whatever it was, when I finally ended up paying everything off. And then that, let's see, geez, that was in 63 when I started going into business for myself.
Wow.
Well, right after that, Uncle Sam came knocking. Says, we want you.
Oh, boy.
And I'm thinking, here, I finally get a business. It's just starting, and
Got
now
my wheels under me, and I'm starting to roll.
Now, Uncle Sam wants me. So I went into the reserves and into the Army, and I was gone for 6 months. So I had a landlord at the shop. So he was willing to work with me. So in fact, he cut my rent in half, just, so I'd make it. So we worked it out, my landlord and I, and then I came back after that, and I went back into business, started to work, and then it was starting to build cars. And that would have been in probably 64, 65, right in there.
Oh, wow.
I'm still wanting to do cars. So I would have a couple different cars that I would put into Autorama. That was our local Detroit car show. And I got to know Bob Larabee.
Yeah.
So during this time, they would lease a car from Barris and Roth and all of the well-known California builders, and they would use their cars as feature cars.
Oh, sure.
So during the shows, well, maybe it'd get a scratch or a scuff in it or a chip or something other like that.
Oh, yeah.
And they would bring them to me, and I would repair them so they could get them back out on the show circuit. So I did that for a couple years, so that's how I met Bob. And then in 68, late 67, 68, I decided that I wanted to build a car for Autorama, a different car. And that's when I built the fire truck.
Oh,
that was
sure.
in 68, Autorama.
And the fire truck's a really cool car. Before we talk about that, and
Yep.
I'm going to drive you crazy, I want to rewind a little bit because you touched on some really cool stuff. I'm going to go back to the beginning where you talked about your model car that you won your first trophy with.
Oh, yes.
I think it was at dinner when we were talking. Did that start out as a promotional, and then you kit bashed and used all kinds of different parts on it, or how
Right,
did that work? 'Cause
well,
you talked
yes.
about cutting the doors open.
Right. Now, back then, they didn't have a lot of kits, but I had a promo. And that was cars that the dealerships
You'd get at the dealer,
you'd
yep.
give out. They bought a new car, and they'd get a model of it. Well, it was a 52, 3, 4. They were basically the same model. And I cut the top off and made it into a convertible. They didn't have convertibles. So I cut the doors, so the doors would hinge open.
Which probably helped that old body, because I know on promotionals, a lot of those old ones started to warp so bad.
Oh, yeah.
Cutting the top off probably helped save that
Yeah.
body for a long time.
So I made it to where the doors, they were, glued open naturally. And then I had real thin plexiglass, plastic, whatever it was from, I don't know. And I cut little vent windows. The vent windows were open, so that was cool back then.
Oh, man, that's serious.
Dummy spotlights. And it was in '59 that I built that, because the headlights and the grill were 59 Chevys, and I canted them with the grill, so I did
that's
that.
cool.
Side pipes, and just different things like that. And that's what I entered into the contest, and I won my first trophy with that, from which, like I said, I still have that trophy today. But that was the things that I did, and build model cars.
Because you had the fever. I mean, you had car fever at a young
Sure.
age. Were your parents into that, or were they kind of like, what's going on with this kid? Or was there one particular person that kind of got you fired up? Or
No, not too much that of fired up, but just magazines.
Yeah.
I mean, when you were kids, then you couldn't get enough magazines,
Yeah.
And you'd put them inside of your school book, and it's really a car book you got inside like you're reading.
Oh, yeah.
But, we all did that back as kids. But no, my mom and dad, then I'd be down in the basement building a model car. Where's Chuck? Oh, he's downstairs. A good friend of mine, George Williams. We built model cars together.
Oh, that's cool.
So we would be in the basement building model cars. And, but my mom and dad, they were into the restaurant business. It was just a mom and pop, blue collar, working man's restaurant, nothing special, but just, it was a good deal for them. And, but they knew what I was doing. I was in the basement, not out running the streets and whatever you want to say.
So they kind of supported your hobby and your interest. And
oh yeah, so
good parents.
they were okay with that.
Yeah,
at least
cool.
they knew what I was doing.
Yeah,
not out getting into trouble. But that's what I did, was build model cars.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really neat. And what did you say you paid for your '49 Ford when you bought it?
50 Ford Coupe, $35.
Oh, $35. That's
$35, and it was a stick six. And you look at it and you could see the crank, the fan would be going in and out. It was wore out, but it was mine.
That's right.
It was mine.
Yeah. And you started working on that right away. And,
Oh, yeah.
And you kind of traded cars through the years. You'd finish one and then you'd kind of move on to the next thing. Right after that car, what came next after the?
The 50 Coupe I had, then I traded for a 55 Chevy 210.
That's a beautiful car. I've
Oh, it was
seen
nice.
the pictures in the book.
Yeah,
Gorgeous.
And naturally, I started on that. I painted it candy, wild cherry, emblems lowered, and back then, the things that we did to it. And then I traded that for a 55 Crown Vic Ford.
Mm-hmm. Which is also a beautiful car.
Nice car. And it was a nice, straight, clean car. And then I traded that for a 57 Ford. So I just gradually going up. Then I got a 59 Thunderbird convertible. I wanted a Boxbird.
Oh, yeah.
So anyways, I got that, customized that, had different taillights and grill, and painted it candy green. Then I decided I wanted to sell that. Then I bought a 61 Bullet Bird, the pointed bird. I bought that one. And then my mom and dad, they would always think, like, what's he doing? What, just this car, that, he's doing this. He just, kind of shake your head. Can't you just stick with
one? Yeah.
Can't you just leave it alone? Oh, yeah. So I traded the 59 Bird for a 61, and it was just a couple years old. Nice, clean Thunderbird, nice interior. Oh, yeah, it was really nice. And I was saying my mom and dad had a restaurant. So I picked up the 61 at a dealer. It was a used car dealer, a Buick dealer. And I figured, well, I'll go by and show my dad my new car. So went by the restaurant. My dad, he came out of the back of the restaurant and on the alley where I pulled into park. And he came out and walked around and says, boy, this is really a nice car. Inside out, closed the doors and everything. Really
you don't
nice.
even need to change anything.
Oh, this is nice. Boy, you ought to leave this one alone. Yeah, okay, yeah, maybe. Well, I gotta go. So I went back to work, after picking it up, went down to the shop, and I think at the time I was living at home. And when I came home that night, I think all the emblems were off, all primered. So he'd just shake his head, and you can't leave anything alone.
Always making it better.
Oh, sure. You had to do that. That's what we do.
And how did you learn to paint? Was it just, you didn't go to school for that, you just self-taught?
Right. The gentleman, like I say, I worked for, naturally he showed me, it was the priming and, how to do this and block sand, and back then doing Bondo work and things like this. And just like I like you say, with painting, it's you have the knack for it.
Yeah,
you know,
it's
and
an
like,
art. It
right?
really
and like
is.
different kids that would work at the shop for me. You know, you would ask them, you know, you want to paint a car? Oh yeah. Well, here, take this gun and hold it and show me how you would do it. I mean, some of them they'd start just, you know, like you're not painting a garage, you know, you're painting a car.
Yeah.
So I'd ask him, can you dance? And he says, well, I don't know. And I says, well, to be a good painter, you got to learn how to dance because it takes this.
Big, wide
Oh, yeah.
movements, yeah.
And to where your hand and everything is just right. You know,
Sure.
you're not going down the side of a car, you know, like stepping. You got to have a flow to it. Oh, okay. So, and I'm not putting you down or anything like that, but just show me, you know, what you can. You have a nice motion and smooth. Okay. And after that, they got the message.
Isn't that something?
So, and that's just little tricks like that. And I would show them this and how to paint, but a lot of it I just picked up myself.
That's really great. And you know, the guy that ended up selling you the body shop, he must have saw some talent in you to think that, yeah, maybe this guy has it. Maybe he can take this over. Or was it different? Or was it like, I'm getting the heck out of town? And
I'm out of Dodge.
yeah.
He was in Florida enjoying the sunshine and flying his plane.
Oh,
so
there you go.
That's
So,
what
yeah.
he was. And we talked a few times after that, but not too much. So he maybe saw different articles in magazines or something other like that. But that was
sure.
it. I was good friends with his brother. He was still in Michigan.
Yeah.
So I would see him at swap meets or car shows, and we'd always talk. And how's your brother? Oh, he's doing okay. So,
Oh, that's fun.
yeah.
And you know, you touched on Bob Larabee. He's such a good friend of ours
Oh, yes.
too,
Yeah.
and we think the world of Bob. He was just here not long ago, and that's a great history there too. And so you kind of started out helping out. I know when we bring things to shows, you know, with Speedway Motors, how easily things get chipped and nicked. So that's
Oh.
kind of how you started with him, just doing some fix-it stuff, and then it was the fire truck that kind of changed the equation because you built that. And that showed Bob that, wow, this guy's got a little more skill.
He might know what he's doing.
Yeah, exactly.
So when he, you know, like I said, you were saying, you know, I did a lot of touch-up stuff for them, you know, and it was nice, and he liked it and all of this. Yeah. But back then, I mean, I'm just a young kid, and I'm talking to Bob Larabee, you know.
Yeah.
And so we got along like that. That was good. But then I built the fire truck, and that was at Detroit Coble Hall Autorama in '68. So he saw that, and whose is this? And oh, that's Chuck's. And he says, wow, you know, wow, it's really nice, and this and this. So then after that, they wanted to make a model of it. I won the Riddler Award in '68 with it.
Number 5, it would have been
That
the
was the
fifth
fifth
year
one,
for the Riddler.
yes.
Yeah.
And I won the Riddler with that. So naturally, Bob thinks, wow, this guy might know what he's doing. The car looks good and everything. They're making a model of it and whatever.
Yeah.
So that was it. So Bob was real good guy back then.
Sure.
And still today. So then during, say, the summer of '68, Bob was at a toy show in Chicago where Monogram, AMT, and MPC, all of these companies would get together and show their new products coming out.
Right alongside the big G.I. Joe and all these other, probably
All
every
of
other toy under the sun was there.
Everything back then. So Bob was there, and they had the model of the Red Baron. You know, all models of it and stacks of model kits and all this. So he thought, boy, that's really cool. Boy, I wonder how it would be to build a real one of that. So he contacted Monogram, and I said, I'm interested in the Red Baron, and I'd like to, how would you feel about building the real one? Well, that's a no-brainer, you know.
Yeah.
Absolutely, we would like that. So that means selling more kits.
Exactly.
So Bob came back from Chicago with a model, and he came to the shop, and we sat and we talked, and he said, well, do you think you could build this, the Red Baron? Yeah, I mean, you can't say no to Bob, you know.
Well, absolutely.
So,
and that was interesting too, because the guy that designed the Red Baron, that kind of came up with the idea, that was Tom Daniels, and was he a custom car builder too? Or was he kind of an idea guy?
I don't know for sure, but naturally he was a designer, still today, and he designed it. Yeah. I do not take credit for designing it, nothing like that, but Tom designed it. It was his design. And then Bob said, can you build it? And I said, sure.
Yeah.
So I built it for Bob in '69, and then from there we had it at Autorama in '69 at Detroit Coba Hall, and it went over just fantastic, naturally, because kids had the model of it, and they wanted to see the car, and really it really went over good. In fact, Bob even said through the year, he just said, if I would have known it would have gone over that well, I would have built 2 of them.
Yeah.
One for the East Coast, one for the West Coast.
That
Because
way
back then, Bob was doing, 30, 40, 50 shows a year.
Absolutely.
So, and they wanted it all over the place.
Yeah.
So it could have been a good feature car, both East and West as well.
You were a pretty darn good custom car builder, but what were the challenges in creating the car? Because that had to, I mean, I've opened that model kit. You get a little bit to work with, but it's, to create something like this, that's a leap.
Right. Well, naturally, I put the kit together, and now you start looking at it. We had a couple kits, one in pieces and one not, already put together. So naturally, it's scaling it, and figured, well, the tires are pretty much what they're going to go off of. You're not going to get special ones, so let's go with this, go with that then. And then we figured, well, it's got to have an engine. So we looked at the engine in the kit, but it was a Mercedes aircraft engine, which is, 8, 10 feet long, whatever it was, way out of proportion.
Super hard to find.
Couldn't find one. So I figured, well, we have to come up with something at least looks airplane-ish, if you will, aviation. So we came up with the overhead Cam 6 Pontiac, valve cover in the middle, so it would look,
very
kind of
similar,
like what we wanted to achieve. You don't want a V8 in it. You don't want that. You can't do that. So anyways, we went with that. And the only difference was the exhaust is on the right side instead of the left side.
Oh, sure.
So then after that, we figured, well, let's go with this engine. And then it was making the body. That was a challenge. And then naturally the German helmet top.
Sure, because the body's steel, all fabricated.
Right.
Yeah, it's not something where you started with a Ford T-bucket.
Oh, no.
Absolutely,
everything is handmade. The frame, we started with the frame because of the sweep in the back with the lightning holes in it. So we had to have the frame because that's the flow of the body as well in the back.
Sure.
So a lot of them back then, out on the West Coast, they were doing them out of fiberglass, like Roth and people like this. They would just make them out of fiberglass. But, well, I guess I just wanted a little more of a challenge to myself.
And the stability's nice.
Right. So I wanted to make it out of metal. So it was a challenge, but nonetheless, I wanted to do that.
Sure.
So made the body, at least to get the shape of everything around it, and then it was making the helmet.
Oh, sure.
To where it looked right for the kit and to the car and the way everything slanted and went together. And the roof is made out of fiberglass, but we had to make up a buck out of wood and wire and everything for the clay. So we clay modeled the whole top.
Oh, wow.
Just like Ford, GM, Chrysler did back there when they did cars. They were clay models.
Sure.
Well, we did the helmet, made a mold off of that, and then made the fiberglass helmet out of the mold.
Wow.
So then bolted those together. Excuse me. So that's the way those two went together. And like you say, the challenges of it, that was it. And then naturally making the machine guns, those were fun.
Oh, boy.
And then the grill shell and just everything put it together.
And we were looking yesterday at the machine guns, and I thought it was so much fun. You said, hey, do you know what this piece is? And it was a found object, something you'd track down in a store.
It was,
just a bowl that you'd use for cooking.
Yeah, the front of the machine gun. I had to cut the back leading edge from which would be the top of the pot, but it had just a nice shape in the front. So I figured, boy, that would be just about right, and it's smooth.
Yeah.
Like I wanted the front of the cone of the machine gun, and that was a mixing pot, like a quarter cup, half cup, whatever in it, and I cut the handle off, trimmed it out, and put it on the front, and it's stainless steel.
Yeah.
Polished it, so it looked good for the front of the machine gun, but the rest of it, that was all scratch built.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great. And this car was a runner. I mean, you actually drove this car around a little bit.
Oh yeah, I drove it in a couple different parades, and when we took it to California, right after the Detroit show, we took it to Oakland Roadster Show. And that's when we met Tom Daniel. We met him there for the first time. We were
Oh.
going to show him his design, his car, the whole deal. And we had it at the show. Everything went good. Everybody liked it, and this and this and this. So the one day, Tom came to look at it.
Oh boy.
So Tom came and looked at it, and he just looked at it, shook his head, and just, you messed up my car.
Oh,
and he
no.
was just, up in arms about it. And Bob and I just, what? He says, you screwed it up. You got the exhaust on the wrong side. And well, Tom,
Have you ever seen one of those Mercedes engines before? Yeah.
it's from here to there long, out of proportion. We had to do some. Oh boy! And he stomped off. He was really, really mad about it.
Isn't that something? Wow.
So, anyways, Bob and I just looked at each other like, what happened? So, anyways, Tom, he came back a little while later, and well, yeah, it does look good. You did a nice job on it, and the whole deal.
Oh,
handshake,
sure.
and it looks good. So
Well,
he was
that's
happy
good.
with it after that. So then after, like you say, does the car run, shows all over, and the big deal out there is everybody drives them out of the show.
Oh,
You know,
sure.
that's the big deal. They line up as they pull them out. So Bob asked me, he says, does it run? I said, yeah. He's,
That's cool.
want to go for a ride? Yeah. Okay, so he's all pumped up on it. So we get in the car and we fire it up with the exhaust right there. I mean, it's belching flames, So it's loud, rapping.
Oh,
He
boy.
said, okay. So I take off and I pull out of the building, out into the parking lot, just to give him a ride with it. But that day it had rained,
Oh no.
and there was a few puddles out there, and it was dark out there, and I couldn't see it. A puddle, and I hit this puddle. I mean, just so deep, whatever it was, it didn't matter. But when I hit that water, this water just came right up over where you would have usually a windshield.
Oh, sure.
And it came right over and hit both of us right in the face. And I thought, oh, is he going to be mad? Here's Bob in his nice three-piece suit, the whole deal. So it
Love
just
it. I can
splashed
almost
us.
see it.
We got back, and I just thought he'd be mad, but he just laughed about it.
Oh,
and
did he
just
really?
wiped
Oh,
it
that's
off, and
great.
that was okay. No, don't worry about it. That was fun, and he liked it. And I thought, oh boy, I guess he is an all right guy then.
Oh man, yeah.
Yeah.
He's,
But
I
that-
could picture it.
That was, the deal with the Baron then.
So yeah, you came to the museum yesterday, and we were walking around, and obviously looking at a lot of wonderful displays around the museum here. We walk right next to a Tucker and a Duesenberg and all these wonderful cars. But I had mentioned that the Red Baron is one of those cars that when people come, anybody that was alive during that time period, they stop in their tracks, they turn their back to the Tucker, and they say, "Holy cow! It's the Red Baron." And we were discussing that, and you had mentioned something that's really kind of drove it home to me. And you said, how many cars are there like that are instantly recognizable, that were such a part of culture that almost everybody knows what it is? Probably the Back to the Future DeLorean, the Batmobile, but I'm sure there are a couple others, but you can count them only on one hand or two.
Yeah.
I mean,
really cars that stood out.
I mean,
back
even
then.
the Monkey Mobile, maybe. I mean, you have that in here today, and a lot of folks would walk by and say, wow, that's a wacky car, but they might not necessarily connect it to something. The Munsters Mobile. I think about all the really neat cars that kind of were around that time period, but
Sure.
the Red Baron, the Hot Wheel. And that's something we talked about a little bit too, is how did the Hot Wheel fit into all this? Because Hot Wheel started in, I believe, '68, so it would have been happening about the same time that all the stuff was happening with the car, but how that actually came into production, we weren't quite sure on that.
Well, the way I could, excuse me, to look at it is the model came first, and then I think maybe a year after that, I'm only guessing that's when the Hot Wheel came out.
Yeah.
Hot Wheels and Matchbox and all of these.
Yeah.
So I think that's when that came after the model kit.
Yeah.
And that's when kids, they started to get into collecting that, because that's the way I would see it, is that's when it started, after the model kit.
So for all you red line Hot Wheel collectors out there, if you want to make a great donation to the museum, I'm really looking for a really mint condition red line Red Baron, because that's one thing we don't have. We'd love to have it next to the model kit and of course the car, but I remember that as a kid. You know, every kid had a Red Baron. Of course now they make all the reproductions and all the different colors, and I think my son has 2 or 3 different Red Barons. And, yeah, so this is obviously his favorite car. So really cool. So kind of moving forward in the timeline, I mean, I could talk about the Red Baron all day. I mean, we've got the Red Baron guitar. We've got, you know, it's such an icon. But the next, you were involved with the Hurst Oldsmobile. Is that right?
Right.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, Hurst Performance, they wanted to do the next edition of the Hurst Olds. The one before was a silver charcoal one, whatever, but they wanted the new one for '69. So Hurst came to me, and with the drawings that Gene Baker, a Detroit designer, he came up with the designs for it. And then Hurst came to me about, can you build this, the prototype? Well, sure, we could do that. So we had the drawings, and we started working on it. It was a brand new Hurst Olds. It was a brand new one, 442. And we started with the deck lid. It had a spoiler across, and then the spoilers came down the side of the quarter panels. We called them elephant tusks, because that's how they came down. Then the hood scoop, I built the hood scoop from their designs. Then there were little spoilers on the back of the hood where there was a vent in the hood about as big as a license plate. Well, we took those off, and I fabricated little spoilers. They just bolted on, from which they could do in production. And then we also put a gold racing stripe over the roof and through the back window. And the back window was just a gold toner, a candy toner, from which you could see through it, but nonetheless it was a stripe. So that's when Hurst went to GM. Well, here's our proposal, here's the car. They looked at it and they liked everything, but says, no, we can't go with those spoilers. It'd be too hard in production to make them, fit them, and do all of this, so they axed it. He says, no spoilers like that. And they didn't like the stripe through the window, the gold stripe, from which today you could get away with it with all the vinyls and everything. But back then, oh no, we can't do that. And then they didn't want to do the spoilers in the hood. Okay, so they didn't want to do that.
So they watered it down just a little bit?
Yeah. So, and then we had different graphics on the hood. They didn't want that. They just wanted just a straightforward hood scoop, spoiler, that's it. Okay, so they brought the original one back. I pulled all of this stuff off and put a different spoiler on it. Hood scoop was okay, had to do a few modifications to that and a little bit of different paint work, and shipped it back, and they said, okay, they bought off on it. And then it was the same with the Rambler Scrambler.
Oh, the Rambler Scrambler, cool car.
They came to me with those drawings, said, we want to build this. Okay, fine, no problem. So we started building that one. Excuse me. Same thing. American Motors, they didn't like the blue stripe through the back window. That went away. And we had different taillights in it. They were Frenched in a little bit. They didn't want that, you know, because they would have to stock them for how long and all of this stuff, so they didn't want to get into that, so we just left the taillights alone, but made the hood scoop, and they went for that. So that's how that went.
So like with the Hurst car and with the Rambler Scrambler, those cars they came to you with the idea, with the design, and said, make it happen, basically. Give us something we can touch and feel, and then from that, were they making molds off of like your hood scoop to have their engineers go into production then? And
then they made tooling off of mine, and then they started running them through.
So you were essentially building them their prototype.
Those were actually the prototype cars that they would do tooling off of to start production. Yes.
So when somebody like myself, I knew a fella that went to Vietnam and didn't come back, but there was a beautiful Rambler Scrambler sitting in a tree grove. So there was a little piece of you in that car.
A
little bit of Chuck Miller. Well, that's really cool.
Yep.
Yeah, that's some neat history. So then after you did the work for General Motors and for American Motors, then you got involved with some other projects like the Zingers. Is that right?
Right.
Tell me about the Zingers, because I think this has a pretty cool beginning, how that all started.
Oh, those were fun cars. Another thing, Bob, he saw the Zinger models. A gentleman in, I think, Ohio, Dennis Johnson, he came up with the idea. It was his idea. And he entered these cars in a model car contest, from which Senior saw him, Larabee, and he said, wow, those are cool.
Dynamite,
boy, it'd really be neat to have some of those. Could you build a real one? He came to me with a model. Can you build these? I said, sure. And because they didn't have the model yet. Because this gentleman, he made the model, but in the meantime, they saw the kit, MPC that he did when he made the original one, so they figured that's a good idea, so they started making the models. Bob came to me with them, let's build these, okay. And the Volkswagen behind us, that was the first of them. Then I built the Corvette.
Love the Corvette.
The van, and then I did a semi-truck. So I did 4 of them. There were 6 built originally, a dune buggy and a dragster.
Okay.
They were in the series, and Steve Tansey in Indiana, he built those 2.
Okay.
There was a 57 Chevy and a Dodge.
Like a D100, like little red wagon type?
Right, that type of like a van, but a pickup. And they had those 2 in the models, but those 2 were never built.
Never
came about, but I did 4 of the 6. And this yellow one here behind us is the Volkswagen.
Oh, cool.
So, but those were 1/2 scale bodies with full-size tires, wheels, engines up through the roof or out of the hood or out
just wacky.
Yeah, just wild. And people look at it and say, how do you drive it? You don't.
It's a sculpture, essentially.
It's an engine stand, basically.
Yeah.
But those were fun to build.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
And so the Zingers were kind of crazy, and they maybe even related to what Ed Roth was doing, with the monsters and the big engines.
Oh,
and
yeah, Rat Fink.
Oh, yeah. So,
yes.
so just wonderful creations. And we were talking last night with Carson Smith. We were out to dinner, and Carson said something to you that I thought was right about on the money. He said, thanks for being a part of, what was happening in the 60s and 70s, making the car culture fun, making custom cars fun, and getting kids, to kind of notice and realize that there was kind of this whole world out there that they could get involved in. And I think of that because so many people come through the museum, and when they see, the Zinger, or they see the Red Baron and, or Roth's car, they say, wow, that's what got me hooked, and you were a huge part of that, I think, with the Zingers and all the stuff you were involved in.
That's very possible. Sure. When kids see that, but you have to get kids involved.
Yeah.
Take them to a car show, anything. But if we're going to continue this, it's going to come from the youth, and we got to get them involved.
Yeah.
Sure.
And it doesn't matter to me if it's a young person building a 928 Porsche with a LS, or if they buy a car cheap. And I think that was kind of the fun of when guys like you got started. Cars were cheap. It was after the war in the 50s and 60s when Fords were laying around, and you could buy them for a song and a dance and have fun and experiment. And if something went wrong, oh well, And nowadays things are a little bit different in that way. But I think you're right. Getting people off the phone and away from the computer and working with their hands again, I think that's really important.
Yeah. Keep them involved. Yes.
Yeah,
I think that's important.
So yeah, you've been involved in so many things. You go from the factory stuff with the Hurst Olds and the Rambler Scrambler, and then the Zingers. Working with Larabee again. But then you get involved in racing too. You've done some paint work for Indy and pace cars, and tell me a little bit about that.
Well, that was. I got involved with PPG in the early 80s.
That was the segue into all these interesting things.
That was the deal. In 80, PPG wanted to get involved with IndyCar races. So that's when they started sponsoring IndyCars, the races. But they couldn't be partial to Ford, GM, Chrysler, because they were suppliers of materials to, the companies. So they had to have a pace car for each company.
Oh, sure.
Well, then they had also American Motors. So I did the AMX pace car for PPG. That was the American Motors one. Then somebody else did the Ford, the GM, and the Chrysler one. So they had all four. So they would tour them, and those were the pace cars for the IndyCar races. Then after that, it got into the next year, then the next year, and the next year. So in the meantime, when all of these cars were being built, they spread out. They got into Nissan. They got into Ferrari. In fact, they even had a Ferrari pace car. It was a one-of pace car, 1 point something by the time they finished it.
Jeez.
So they brought it down, and I painted that naturally Ferrari red.
So how does this happen? So it kind of just, a truck arrives one day at your shop, and they open the door, and out comes this car you've never seen before.
No.
And,
No.
and you have do they show up in primer? How did that Ferrari show? There's a great picture of it in the book.
Yes. No, it came with color on it.
Okay, so it had already
not
been
to their standards.
Ah,
So
sure.
we took the car apart and started working on it, block sanding and straightening it out. All the gaps and everything had to be just fine-tuned, and then painted it naturally a special Ferrari red. That was their color.
their blend, yeah.
Uh-huh. And then it was all lettered up, IndyCar World Series, pace car, and all of this on the doors. And that's what I did for them, for probably 10 years. And then that's when they got out of sponsoring the pace cars. But during that time, I was painting some of the Indy cars. I was painting Scott Brayton's IndyCar. For I think it was 3 or 4 years I painted his. Those were candy red and all of the trick paints from PPG, all the candies and pearls. And then unfortunately, Scott, he got killed at Indy during time trials.
That's right.
So that kind of put a damper on that. But we still kept doing pace cars until PPG got out of it.
Yeah. How did that work with guys like Scott Brayton? Did they show up at the shop to see their cars getting painted, or was it like over the phone, or how did you interact with those guys?
No, Scott, he came by a couple times.
Yeah.
Yeah, he came by a couple times and just to check on everything, and we met him, and just a super guy, just a young man. I mean, he was only in his 20s.
Isn't that
And
something?
back then, naturally, all the racers had bicycles. They'd ride a bicycle around the pit,
sure.
and stuff like that. So we painted a couple 20-inch Stingrays for him and his girlfriend at the time. And his wife, it turned out to be his wife later on. And so we painted those to match his pace car or his race cars, so they would drive them around the pits with some helmets on. And yeah, so all back then it was just fun.
That's great. And
Yeah.
bicycles are cool. That kind of reminded me of a picture I saw of you, and this is going to sound really backwoodsy, because when I grew up, my dad was very proud of his Spud guns. He would shoot these things off, and we had an old pickup, and he'd shoot the door, and the potato would disintegrate. And I look back, and I was thinking, geez, with all the Aquanet we used in those things, it was probably pretty dangerous. But there's a picture of you in the book with a couple of Spud guns. Tell me, were you the inventor, or did you just get into Spud guns?
No, it was a friend of mine by my old shop. He came by one day, and he had one. And he says, "Look at this, I just made this." What the heck is that? Called it a Spud gun. So it's made out of PVC, just
Unscrew the back.
Unscrew the back, and it was all put together with all just plumbing PVC. Mm-hmm. Unscrew the back, and it had a barbecue igniter just for the spark. Yep. So what you'd do is you'd take a potato and push it in with a ramrod to go down, pack it all the way down, unscrew the back, take 3 shots, Aquanet, cheap hairspray, cheapest you can find, cap it back up, get back, aim it, and hit that trigger, and you will not believe how far that potato would go.
Oh man, that's funny.
By the shop, out in the back of the shop, there was a building, had a steel door. And we hit that steel door, and it just it was an explosion. What the heck? So naturally, we all ran back in the shop, and oh boy, don't tell anybody this. But it was fun. And now, where I live now, in the back of my property, there's deer back there.
Oh, sure.
And I had an apple tree in my backyard. Well, that's how I feed the deer. So I'd pack it, I'd see one back there, and I'd hit it and launch an apple way back there. So, You could shoot anything at them.
Yeah, kids, I'm not condoning building one, but they are a lot of fun. I mean,
They're a lot of fun.
Yeah, I
So
have
ask your
great
dad
memories.
first about it.
Yeah, exactly. And when I saw the picture of you with the Spud gun, and yours had a nice long barrel, so
Oh,
that
yeah.
thing was probably pretty accurate. But
It was fun.
It instantly brought me back.
Yeah,
'Cause
and I still have
remember,
it, so.
Oh, they're fun.
Yeah.
I remember when you got a good load of hairspray, it was hard to unscrew the back because it would set the threads in the
And the
PVC.
juice and everything would be in there. And, yeah.
Yeah, that's good stuff. And you know, you're still busy, you're still hard at it, and you know, you're involved. And you know, I told you when I first met you, and it was so much fun when you showed up yesterday. I told you I had to pinch myself because obviously I admire you so much and all the things that you've done. But when I shook your hand, I said, you know, you can tell the difference when you shake the hand of somebody that pays for cars to be built and somebody that actually builds stuff. And
Right.
you know, I can tell you've been a hands-on guy your whole life, and you still enjoy it.
Oh, yes, I still do. Yeah.
Yes.
At a lesser scale now. You know, naturally I've scaled down, but I still do it. I guess you could say I do it for therapy now. You know?
Yeah.
I got to keep doing something. You should. You got to stay active. Just
Yeah.
because you retire from your job, wherever it might be, stay active. Do something.
Yeah.
Not just sit in the house or whatever. Stay out and get busy. And I have a shop at home now, and I work out of my shop. It's kind of a pick and choose. You know, I'll maybe paint a motorcycle for somebody or a flame job on a car. You know, stuff like that. I still try to stay involved with it.
All the interesting people you've touched on and been involved with over the years, I think that's just such a rich story, and yeah,
It's
so
been
much
fun. It's been a
Yeah.
good ride, as you want to say. You know.
Well, you can tell you're a happy guy, and when you showed
sure.
up here, big smile on your face, and you've been fun to walk around with, and you know, and you're still, you know, you have a couple hot rods you play around with. You mentioned your Corvette, and you have another one that you're.
Well, I just sold. I had a '47 Ford Woody wagon and
yes.
a '32 Highboy Roadster. I just
boy.
sold those. One went to Northern California, and the Roadster's in Florida, near Daytona. Then I have a '61 bubble top Cadillac,
Oh, that's
a Corvette wagon, and also a '56 Chevy pickup, all patinaed.
Oh, nice.
And just
something without paint.
It's fun. Yes, I put gas in it and clean the tires and the windows. The rest of it, leave it the way it is. It's fun to drive.
Wow. Well, listen up, guys. For all the hot rodders out there that don't paint your cars, Chuck Miller, probably one of the masters of the excellent paint job, has a car that has patina. So yeah, that means a lot to me because
yeah.
I can't afford paint on my cars.
They don't all have to be pretty and painted and shiny. No,
Oh,
no,
that's
leave it
cool.
like it is. That's the fun part. Then you would drive it. You know,
Yeah.
you're not worried, oh, I'm going to get a chip. Oh, it's going to rain. No, it's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a whole new culture now with those types of cars.
Yeah, and you know, cars should be fun and get out and enjoy them. And you know, I always appreciate that when people drive their car to the show. We're about to do a Cars and Coffee here at the museum, and I just love it. You know, people will drive in just about anything that's interesting and
never
not
know.
care if they're a little dusty, and we all have a great time. It's so much fun. And
Yeah.
you know, I know we've touched on a lot, and I'm even kind of bouncing around, but there's one more thing I wanted to ask you about
Sure.
before we wrap up. And that's the rapid transit system, you know, the whole thing with Chrysler and what they did. I almost forgot about it, but then when we were talking about fancy paint jobs, it kind of came back to me. What was that all about?
Well, that's another Larabee deal.
Oh, sure, he was involved in that.
Oh yes, he was involved with that at the beginning, from which they had a good working relationship. Chrysler and PPG or Promotions Incorporated back then is what Bob's company was, and they wanted to do a road show of cars, you know, different ones: a Barracuda, a Roadrunner, a Duster, and a dragster, or a funny car, Prudhomme's funny car. So they wanted to do a road show. So back to Harry Bradley. So Harry Bradley drew up some drawings of what he thought would be a good roadshow cars.
Yeah.
And they proposed it to Chrysler. Chrysler bought it, and Bob came to me, and with the Barracuda. It was the CUDA. So I made it into what they call today is the Rapid Transit System, RTS. And this was a fully brand new, brought it down, start cutting it up, Barracuda.
Wow.
Brand new CUDA. And it's, when you see it, it's very recognizable. It's with the front end and the back end and the paint, there was a blend of colors and what have you.
Just a far out,
Right.
massive changes to
Oh
the
yeah,
design.
a lot of work done to the car. And then what they would do, they had those 4 cars and cutaway engines and things like this. And they would go to dealership shows all over the country. So maybe certain dealer would have it for 3 days, they would pack it up and then go to another dealer in another state and whatever. Well, that went for that whole year. Then it came time for the new cars to come out, the next model. They did a new Roadrunner back then.
Oh,
Well,
sure.
Same thing, Harry designed it. Bob got the drawings, went to Chrysler, they okayed it. They brought me a brand new Roadrunner back then
Wow.
and started cutting it up. And that's the Roadrunner they used after that one. And it was orange pearl and white pearl. So, and then the Barracuda, or the Cuda, I repainted that another color to make it another car, another color design and all that, but that's how that came about. Then they did dealership shows for the rest of the time with those.
Just really cool cars.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I've seen, we'll show some pictures of them, but yeah, just dynamite looking.
Yeah, when you see it, you know it.
machines.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it kind of makes me think you've been involved with so many cars. Do you keep track of where a lot of these cars have ended up, especially like some of the rapid transit cars? Are they still in existence? Are they in collections here?
Excuse me, yeah. In fact, Steve Giuliano in California, he's got all but the Cuda.
Oh, is that right?
He's got the Runner, the Duster, the funny car, engines, display stuff, and banners, and everything
wow.
in his collection, a big Mopar collector. And he's in California. And the Cuda is out there, but the guy that owns it is a little strange. He will not let anybody look at it.
Oh, is
no
that right?
pictures, no
It's his
nothing.
baby.
And Steve wants the car, but it's just not for sale.
Wow.
You know,
That's
he thinks
interesting.
he's got a gold mine, but anyway, Steve, he has the majority of them, the collection. But there's the one, the Cuda.
Yeah. Now, is there one particular car in your history you'd love to find again?
Well, it comes down to the Sonic
Oh, the
Cuda.
Sonic
The
Cuda.
Sonic Cuda was similar to the RTS Cuda, but it's MIA. Just
Nobody's
nobody
ever
knows
figured
where
out
it's
where it
at, and that's it. I would like to find the car. In 2010, I was Builder of the Year at Detroit Cobo Hall Autorama, and I tried to have as many of my cars back in my display that I could. I had the fire truck and the Baron and Zingers and all of these
That
cars
had
and
to
a
have been
vet
fun.
wagon. I had a whole block of cars. And we had it on, you know, Facebook, everything, wanted if you know where and the whole
Oh,
deal,
sure. Just never
but never
showed
could
up.
find it, and nobody knows where it's at.
Well, Chuck, I got to thank you so much for coming and being with us. This has been such a fun visit. I know we have more to come. We're going to get to walk around the museum,
sure.
look at the Baron a little bit more. You know, we're going to be here for Cars and Coffee tomorrow. I can't thank you enough. This is just really great.
Been a pleasure.
Oh, you bet. And I always talk about how working in a museum, you think you're going to be so enthralled with all the cars and objects, but it really is the people and the stories behind the cars, the real
Absolutely.
history. So,
Yes.
so for everyone out there, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. Until next time, we'll see you then.